Hi, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming to this year's student panel. I am Alicia. I'm the chair of the Committee on Student Issues and Concerns, the group that hosts a number of student-related events every annual meeting and institute, including this one. So thank you for being here. I'm delighted to introduce our three panelists for today, who are here to talk to you about a variety of topics related to navigating different types of professional relationships and changing roles and these types of things. And they're here to answer all of your questions. So please ask them anything you like. They'll give you a more in-depth bio of kind of to contextualize who they are and what they're doing. But I'm glad to introduce Emily Pace, Nancy Frishberg, and Laura Wagner. Thank you.
All right, so I think I will go ahead and introduce myself first. As Alicia said, my name is Emily Pace. I'll give you a little bit of my background, starting at the beginning. So I got an undergraduate degree in Georgetown, from Georgetown, in French and Arabic. I was just at a career mixer for like an hour and a half, so hopefully you'll all be understanding of any little slip-ups here. So I got my undergraduate degree. During that time, I did an internship at the Library of Congress. I did a year of study abroad at Sciences Po, so I was also focusing a lot on political science and history. After I graduated with that degree, I decided I wanted to spend a little bit of time working out in the world before I went back to school. I figured I probably would go back to school at some point. Linguistics was on my radar, but I just wanted to know what it was like to have a job, go to work 40 hours a week and see if that was maybe a lifestyle that was compatible with what I wanted. So I spent the next three-ish years working for a couple of different nonprofits in the DC area. I worked for a civic education organization for high school students called the Close-Up Foundation. And then after that, I worked for the National Association of Attorneys General for 3 years as a project assistant. That involved a lot of administrative work and also a lot of working with our event management team to put on and organize and execute various events for our membership, which was the 56 state and territory attorneys general. And I gained a lot of experience during that told me, you know what, industry and working outside of academia, that's for me. So I went back to Georgetown. I got my MS in theoretical linguistics, did some computational and corpus work while I was doing my master's degree. And then after I graduated, did a little bit of contracting work in grad school for IBM Watson and a local company in the DC area as well. And after graduating with my master's degree, I took a job with a small company called Expert System USA. We are part of a larger global company called Expert System. We do text analytics and natural language processing. The entity that I work for focuses exclusively on public sector clients. We're based in the DC area, so that primarily means the federal government, although we would also be available to work with local and state governments. I'm our principal linguist. I oversee a team of 5 knowledge engineer / linguists within the company. 4 of them have linguistics degrees. So we love to hire linguists. I love working with linguists. And I think that's where I'll stop.
Okay. As you can tell, Emily has been at an event in a large, noisy room and talking to a lot of people at once. And I was there too, but I'm going to try to slow down a little bit. I don't promise everything, but we'll start that way. Again, my name is Nancy Frishberg. I am currently a freelance person. I have my own organization, Frishberg, because nobody can spell my name. And I work as a user experience researcher or strategist. There are lots of little names for what I do. I started out as undergraduate in linguistics at UC Berkeley. I got my graduate degree from UC San Diego. I was the first person at UC San Diego who finished a PhD with a specialty in American Sign Language Studies. So I was a faculty member for 7 years at 3 different institutions, and I kind of worked my way out of academia from a tenure track position to a contract-only position at a place that only offered contracts. That was Hampshire College in Amherst, Mass. And then I went to NYU and worked on a government contract. And when they lost their money from the government contract, that was my soft landing. So I initially did education consulting, mostly on issues related to deafness, sign language, curriculum development, individual, teaching staff how to evaluate students, a lot of stuff like that. And then I happened into a job at IBM, which was the in-house professor peer to the professors all at the university. So I was the person who gave credibility to the sales team, because I would go on calls with them and talk to the curriculum committee or the dean or whoever was going to buy computers from IBM. And I can tell you stories about that. Then I had a management training job where they were grooming me to be a first-line manager. And at the end of that period, loved working with all those people. It was wonderful, but I didn't want to stay on the East Coast. I found a rotational assignment inside IBM that I hoped would launch me back to the West Coast. And that was with the User Interface Institute. I found my people. These were cognitive scientists and computer scientists who appreciate cognitive scientists, and a few designers. Wow. And so that's the milieu I've been working in or wanting to work in ever since. I had a few transitional jobs because when I did move to the West Coast, it wasn't instantaneous that I got a job in that field, but I knew that's what I was pointing at. And I started going to lots of meetups, we didn't call them that then, to meet other people who were doing that kind of work so that I could find jobs doing that kind of work. So I've been 40 years outside of the academy, and now I'm semi-retired. And I'm promoting careers for linguists outside of academia because I don't believe that all of you who are getting trained are going to be able to find satisfying jobs inside of academia. And I know this is a growth market for linguists, cognitive scientists, and people who want to do things, want to get things done, implement stuff, make things happen. Oh, I'm also doing some coaching now of people who are career changers, not only linguists and not only academics turning into industry people, but people who are in industry who think, I've been doing this for a long time, what else can I do? Because everybody gets to that point where you can't even see what else there is around. You've been doing this thing for a long time. Oh, you've got one.
You think this one works?
Yeah.
Does this one work? Yeah, it does. So I'm Laura Wagner, and I feel suddenly like the odd person out at the table. So I'm actually a faculty member with tenure at The Ohio State University. I think the reason that I'm on this panel is because I'm one of your wackier faculty members. I come from linguistics, so my undergraduate degree is actually in language studies and cognitive science. My PhD is in linguistics. So I'm legit, I'll hold all the way down. But I did pick up a master's degree in psychology while I was in graduate school, and I have been in psychology departments ever since. So I did a postdoc with psychologists, and I've done adjunct teaching as a psychologist. I had the long and winding career path that means that you do a little postdocing, a little adjunct teaching, a little bit more postdocing, some more adjunct teaching. It took me a long time before I got the tenure track job, but I did get it. And I'm in psychology, even though I have the PhD in linguistics. And then over the last 7 or 8 years, I started doing something that I never expected that I would be doing, which is that I have my lab moved into a science museum. And as part of doing that, I adopted an enormous amount of outreach as part of what I do. So I still do like straight up research, like regular kind of faculty members. But then I do this other wacky thing, which is that I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to talk to the public about language and linguistics and how to train students to talk to the public about language and linguistics. And so I now devote a lot more of my time to thinking about language outside the academy in that way, even though I am still in the academy.
So we'd love to have you ask us questions because even though we were primed with a couple of questions, I think, I don't know that the people who are in the room are the ones who suggested the questions, and so we'd rather talk to you.
We promise that we're not scary. We are here to help you, and we will answer whatever questions you have.
And I believe in wait time. Yes, please.
What in the world is a knowledge engineer?
So I'm going to repeat the question. What in the world is a knowledge engineer?
So I will take that question. That is the term, since I was the one who used it, that is the term that we use within our company because the people who are doing our linguistic work are not computational linguists. So they don't have backgrounds in computer science, they don't have backgrounds in computational linguistics. Some of them may have some scripting skills in something like Python, but we decided on a term that was a little less technical at face value, so it wouldn't be quite so scary. And what they do for us is to implement categorization and extraction projects. So what that means is document categorization and entity extraction. Document categorization basically involves categorizing a set of documents against a taxonomy. So you want to know what's in these documents and how do they relate to each other. What exactly that taxonomy looks like is entirely dependent on what the client needs to know from their data. So for instance, you can just think of like a standard news organization. You know, you've got politics, you've got science, you've got health. You can classify down on from there. Entity extraction involves identifying named entities, things like people names, place names, phone numbers, email addresses, etc.
I'm going to add to what you said. Another name for that job that is familiar to me, or the name for that work, is information architecture and information architects, right?
Yeah.
So they do that. They're like librarians, and they categorize things, and they define, and they're the people who may be involved with whatever large website it is and decide how to name the menu items, because what you call them inside and what your audience on the outside knows them as might not be the same thing. And the other piece about that is very often new organizations or not very aware organizations will make websites where it's all about how we are organized, the silos that we organize our employees into. But that's not useful for people from the outside, customers coming to you to find out, how do I get this thing done that you supposedly do? Because they don't know the names of what we call it. So you have to be responsive to the audience.
And actually, Nancy, I really appreciate you adding an additional name. So I'll add a couple more
Good.
that I've seen that we don't use within Expert System USA, but that I've seen for other organizations. Things like taxonomy management, ontology management, knowledge management / manager. Yeah,
I want to be.
those are all other sorts of titles that you might see that are in that same field.
Question there?
Yeah, so I'm a fifth-year PhD student, and I'm dissertating, and I'm
Yay!
what a colleague of mine has referred to as the valley of shit, where
Yes.
everything seems terrible, and I'm in the position of wondering if being in academia forever is really for me. But I expressed this to my parents, who are both academics, and I get the warning that it is almost impossible to get back into academia if you leave it. So, what would you advise to, try and find a career that makes a person happy without opening too many doors?
I'm going to repeat your question, but I might abbreviate it. You're a fifth-year student in dissertating, and you're in the valley of shit. I understand that. And your parents who are academics are giving you the warning that if you are career curious, be careful, because you may... I had to do that.
I love it. Thank you.
Okay.
Word of the year. I hear you.
If you're career curious, you should be very cautious, because you may not ever be able to get back into the academy again. And they are correct. Mm-hmm. However, think about the proportion of jobs in the United States only that are academics compared to other things. There are many, many options for you. You don't have to commit to it right now, but you can start networking, start looking around. When you want to take a break from that dissertating, and I don't encourage you to take a long break, finish the thing that you've started doing. I'll be my mother now. How's your paper going? Every week, right?
God, stop. Don't do that to her.
Anyway, none of us here cares whether you finish the dissertation, but your parents definitely do care.
I care. You should finish.
And I'm really in favor of finishing, because it's a lovely credential to have, and it's a license into a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, the reason I got my IBM job was because I had a PhD. They didn't care what field it was in, and they didn't ever ask me a thing about linguistics. But, you know, the fact that I had done that work made me a credible person to the audience we were talking to, namely academics in decision-making positions. So you can be career curious without committing to a different career path. Is that a fair answer?
I want to add a little bit to that because I'm sympathetic to the valley of shit. It can get very deep. One of the things to think about, I would actually encourage you right now not to make a strong decision about the rest of your life when you're feeling like you're deep in the shit, because it might not be you at your best self. But one of the things that is worth thinking about is that academia also isn't just one thing. So I don't know what part of linguistics you're in. Oh, excellent. Sociolinguistics, right? So sociolinguistics is a nice field in this way because it actually connects to a lot of other things. So you might want to think about, instead of just thinking, oh my God, I'd have to be a sociolinguistic like I was trained to be for the rest of my life. Think about looking into, say, postdocs in other fields or positions like that might be temporary and less pressure, so that they're not about like you committing the rest of your life to a tenure track position right now, which will frankly feel like a lot more shit, because it does get worse before it gets better. But something that is sort of more temporary, so that you have the freedom to sort of remember why you liked the field in the first place and give yourself a chance. And also, if it's a little bit less pressure, it gives you an opportunity to be a little bit more career curious. It'll give you, if you're feeling a little more chill, you'll be better at all the different parts of it. So something a little more go for something like temporary for a little while to let yourself chill out.
You go for it.
So, since I stopped after my master's degree, I didn't really have a valley of shit. It was more like a ditch. But I'd like to add a little something else here about family expectations, because I also come from a 2 PhD household, and my dad's a lawyer as well. So I grew up, So I grew up assuming that I was going to do a PhD, particularly because between myself and my sister, I was the one who was a lot more academically inclined, and I loved school. And I said, oh, of course, I'll do a PhD. And I actually had a friend talk me out of it, because the thing that he said before I started grad school, he was doing a PhD, by the way. So he had decided that that was the path for him. The thing that he said to me was, figure out where you want to go, and then figure out if you need a PhD to get there. Mm-hmm. And if you don't need it, or it's not really, really useful to get to where you want to be, then it might not be the thing that you should do. And that was, to some degree, a very emotionally charged decision for me, because I had spent my whole life figuring I would do it. I had to decide not to. And it still is, to some degree, difficult. My sister's now a medical doctor. She's also married to another doctor who also has a PhD. Wow. So myself and my husband, with our one master's degree each, are like sort of the academic failures of the family, in a sense. We both have great jobs in private industry. We both like what we do, and we don't regret having stopped after master's degrees. And there's always more school, right? Just because you finished once doesn't mean you can't go back. But it's a really difficult decision. And it can follow you for a while, and that's okay. It doesn't have to feel easy, and it doesn't have to be easy. But, make sure to take the time to think about what it is that you want, even if it's not the thing that your family wants or expects, or the thing that you've wanted for yourself for a long time. You're also allowed to change your mind about your own life.
Wow.
Deep.
Wow. Thank you for that permission. That was good. I like it. I want to add a little bit about how else you can decide. How can you help yourself make the decision? I had my fingers crossed to remember 2 books. One of them is also in audio for sure, I know. And that one is Anna Marie Trester's book called
Bringing Linguistics to Work.
Bringing Linguistics to Work. So she walks you through several ideas about what work might be, and helps you discover some values about your own self, and do some explorations, and advocates for networking and all kinds of good stuff from the point of view of linguistics. So she starts where you all are. That's a good thing. The second one is the book, What Color is Your Parachute? How many
Old
people have
school.
heard of this? Good. Okay, maybe a third of you. This is a book that has been revised every year for about 40 years. And the guy who originally wrote it, excuse me, I did get to hear him speak live one time at a job finders group I was in. But he wrote this book as part of a massive layoff within the Episcopal Church of a whole bunch of ministers who were all trained to be parish ministers. And what are we going to do now? And so he created this book about figure out what was it you liked about being that kind of Episcopal minister at a local church? How can you take those things you liked and add them together with the things you left behind that you couldn't pursue and make a new life for yourself in work? And because this book has been revised every year, it means that it's up to date and it knows about things like Indeed and, Monster and all the job resource centers. But it also advocates people examine themselves and gives you exercises to do that. They're great to do in a group, small group, 3-5 people together, and where you every week take one of those exercises and share it with each other, especially people who are not from your field, because you can easily give feedback to somebody who's from a completely different background when you hear them talk about stuff. Why are you saying that when last week you were just passionate about this other thing and you left it out completely here? So you can do that kind of feedback for somebody where they can't hear themselves and what they're saying, and likewise they'll do it for you. It's a way for you to do the values clarification part about what is it I want from work. Am I going to find it in academia? Who else can I talk to about what work I might be qualified for? And so he talks also about informational interviewing, which is not job interviewing.
Right.
It's like, what did you do with your life? How did you get to this career? And finding the hidden job market where somebody's thinking in the back of their head, I wish we could get this task done. And if you can ask them about it and they can tell you, you can say, oh, well, I'm not the right person for that, but I have a friend who's actually available who might be. So it's all this business about networking, weak ties. That is not your best friend and your next door neighbor, but it's your next door neighbor's cousin who knows about this great job, but I don't know if you're the right person. Let me tell you about it. So those are good things to look for and look at.
All right, so I know I'm in favor of finishing your dissertation, but I will tell you a nice story about what happens if you don't, because my partner is ABD. So, we went off together to get our PhDs. I got mine, and he opted not to because he decided he wanted to do something else with his life. And okay, so I know that he's ABD, and I just told all of you, so I outed the poor man. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't have to write that on his CV, and he never does. What he writes is that he has a master's. And he doesn't tell people how long it took him to get the master's, and he doesn't tell people that he's ABD, and he doesn't tell people that it was, the master's that you get when you leave a PhD program. He just tells people he has a master's, it's in philosophy, and it impresses the hell out of people in the real world, right? Because one of the things that you get really caught up with if you're in academia is the fact that everybody has a PhD. All your professors have PhDs. Your friends end up with PhDs, or they end up with masters. The deans have PhDs, right? And you start to think that the entire world is made up of people like that. It's not. In the real world, PhDs are shockingly rare. So the reason to get the PhD is that if you get that PhD, it's hard to sell how good a credential that is out in the real world, how smart people will think that you are out in the real world. Like I say, for academia, it's the entry ticket. In the real world, it's way more than that. But in the real world, a master's is a lot. I mean, it's huge. So like I say, so long as you don't write on your CV, I was really trying to get a PhD and I totally screwed it up, and now all I got is this lousy master. Don't do that. Just write, you got this master's and it's in this, and I rock, and people will agree.
Allison.
So I've never had a job in academia, but I'm about 30 plus years into my career. And one of the things I've learned along the way is one of the biggest challenges is managing interpersonal relationships. And interpersonal conflict and navigating professional relationships, working with teams, working with colleagues, working with a supervisor, managing people who are working as part of your team. And so when Alicia and I were talking about this session, we wanted to sort of focus a little bit on some of the biggest challenges in the workplace that straddle both academia and industry and government, and really any workplace. And when I do informational interviews with people coming to me, I often tell them that that's the biggest challenge, is interpersonal relationships in the workplace. And no matter where you work, there's always going to be some asshole.
What?
Yes.
That you have to work
Just one?
around, or get through or manage in some way. And sometimes that jerk is going to be your boss. And sometimes they're going to be somebody that you have to supervise and try to, coach. And so I think we are hoping that you could comment on some strategies, particularly, for early career folks, about navigating some of those power dynamics and interpersonal conflict.
Thanks, and I'm going to repeat your question, but I'm going to abbreviate it because because the camera is catching this, but the microphones are crucial too. So Allison, who is the executive director of the LSA, notes that in her 30 years of career that interpersonal relationships, and especially working with difficult people, can be a big part of the job and the bane of one's existence. Although you can also have very rewarding relationships with people as well. So let's comment on some of that stuff. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, go. You can start. Go
Either
for
way.
it.
I think we all have
We all have stories.
Yes, we all do.
So this was built into Allison's question, and I think probably everybody here in the room knows this, but literally everything, every place that you work at, every team that you are on, all the time, forever, wherever you are, will have a problem. And you will have to figure out how you can navigate that and learn about yourself, what your tolerance point is for working with that problematic person in that environment. Nobody's perfect. None of us up here on the panel are perfect.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe Laura. But we all have our limits of frustration, our limits of working with jerks, or just with people you don't click with. And I think a really important thing to learn about yourself in your first job, that was also part of Allison's question, was early career, is what's your limit? And it can change over time. Because you need to know when a situation in the workplace is too much for you, and you say, I can't be on this team anymore, or I can't be with this company anymore, because, and I'm not talking about environments that are really toxic or hostile or anything like that. You just might not click, right? This just might be a sort of random, we don't really get together, we don't know each other that well, we don't get together that well, we can't really make it work. And it's okay to say, you know what? I can't handle this either. It's not an actively toxic environment, but I just need to find a team where I click better with the people who are on that team. That's a really good lesson to learn about yourself early on. The other piece of sort of guidance that I would give is that it's always worth it, particularly when you start with a new team or in a new organization. This will be true early in your career, and it'll be true forever. It's always worth it to take the time to assess what the interpersonal situation is where you're at. And the amount of time that you need to do that will probably change as you grow in your career. But if you're the type of person who always speaks their mind about something, and you're not sure if maybe that would grate on your new teammates, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to observe for a little bit, or I'm going to jump right in and then see what happens. That's another thing that's worth learning about yourself, and just worth observing, writing thoughts down on, this is the thing that happened today, and here are 3 ways I might have responded to it. And then try to figure out as you get started what you think would have been the best course of action. And that's sort of how you can learn to go into those sort of interpersonal situations, having built a slightly better base for yourself with the observations that you've collected.
Lots of responses, Allison, lots of responses. So the first thing everybody here should know is the statistics continue to say the cause of people leaving an organization is not getting along with your manager. And when you ask people, why are you leaving, they often say, my manager is an asshole, or my manager isn't effective, or my manager doesn't help me, or whatever it is. So it may be helpful for you as you're going in to an organization to ask a bunch of potential peers, what's the culture like here? How do you all work together? What's the most tricky part of being in this job or this organization? What should I be looking out for in the positive and the pitfalls, so that you know ahead of time whether you're likely to get along with everybody? Well, the thing they're complaining about never bothers me, so I won't have the same difficulty as they. That's a possibility. The thing they're mentioning is just what grates on me all the time. I shouldn't join that organization. Another thing that you should be aware of is there's a human resources function in the organization, and you might think that they could be helpful, and they may in the following respects, but they won't in the other respects. Here's how they can be helpful. They probably have resources to help your team self-assess on some tool like the Myers-Briggs personality. Do you know Myers-Briggs type index? Yeah. Now, it's been discredited, but there are some useful things about it. Namely, it's a 16-way, 4x4, right? You've got 4 types and 4 types. So it's kind of like astrology, only 16. But people are pretty consistent about which of those cells they fit into. Okay, I'm sometimes in this cell and sometimes in this cell, but I'm not really that person ever. One of the things you can find from the HR people or from reading books is how to communicate with somebody who's in that cell if you're down here, because this person really cares about numbers. So when you go and talk to them, you've got to bring them some quantitative stuff so they'll listen to you. That may not be your whole point, but that's going to hook them. And this person over here really wants to hear the emotional part of this message, and you just want to give the facts. Find a way to communicate in their style, at least to get their attention and draw them in. So that's HR can probably help in getting your team to realize how you're the same and how you're different and how to talk to one another. Here's how HR is not your friend. HR is in the business of making the company go smoothly. And if you're going to be a noisy troublemaker, they're not going to be too excited about hearing that, okay? So you don't have to be a troublemaker. You can be a solution provider, whatever the hell that means. Okay, that's enough to start with, I think.
Well, I'll say that there's two different things here. One is what happens to you at the beginning of your career, what happens to you later in your career. So when you have power, it's all a lot easier than when you don't have power, right? It's really, I feel like that having the difficult colleagues is much more difficult when you are the one on the I don't have power side of the game, right? Because that's exactly the time when you have to suck it up a little more. And so one of the things that you guys are both saying, which I actually agree with, is a little bit have some patience with the problem for starters. I mean, especially if you don't have power, you may not have a choice about having to have patience with what's going on. And there are obviously limits to everyone's patience, and you should know what your limits are. But the one piece of advice I got from from my postdoc advisor, which has always helped me, is that you don't have to be friends with the people you're working with. You just have to know whether you can work with them. So I have colleagues that I seriously will cross the street to avoid. I mean, I don't like them. I won't have them over for dinner. They're not my friends. But on the other hand, their committee meetings, I am delighted to have them as part of, because I know that they'll vote with me on stuff because we agree about a number of things that we have common goals on. So it's good to know sort of when you can have people you don't have to trust them for everything to trust them for some things. And so being able to separate your personal things from your professional things is useful.
Does that start to answer it, Allison? I mean, no, there's more.
There's a lot more.
There's lots and lots more. Okay, if anybody else wants to bring it up, be
Slap 'em around,
specific,
Allison.
please.
Slap 'em around.
I'm a computational linguistics PhD student in the internet industry, and I'm thinking about the inevitable possibility of being assigned to work on technologies with ethically questionable applications. And I was wondering if you could talk about experiences ranging from, hey guys, we should do this differently, to I'm not touching that with a 10-foot hole that I have to quit. Do you have any experiences you could share navigating that?
I got none.
So
Welcome to the Academy.
Go for it. And I'll come up with an example, I'm sure.
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, the company that I work for, we only provide services to the public sector within the U.S., primarily the federal government, and that means a lot of intel and defense clients. I see you raised your eyebrows there. So when we're talking about potentially ethically charged, ethically problematic groups to work with, this is not a sector that I personally have issues with, but I know that this is a big question in tech generally. This was, for anybody who follows this type of stuff in the news, this was recently a big thing at Google because Google employees decided that that was not something that they wanted to participate in. They didn't want to work with the Department of Defense. And the way that I think of it, because this is a question that comes up a lot in DC, is, what is the sort of organization that different people in the professional world in DC are willing to work for? And I think that in this space, it's good to have more people who not are necessarily actively uncomfortable with the idea of working with that sector of the federal government, but people who bring their ethical mindedness to the role. I understand the impulse of the Google employee community to step away from that, but I think that it is worth engaging with ideas that we as individuals are not necessarily entirely on board with, because we shouldn't have just a room of yes men wherever we are. And it's the role of people who work in that space to say, hey, is this the project we want to take on? Is this the way we want to do it? Do you want to totally leave it aside for another group to do? Or do you want to participate in the development of artificial intelligence for the Department of Defense and try to do as much as you can to remove biases from it? I think that's more the what I would hope people contribute to the field, is to not look at it so much and say, oh, this is never something I would have anything to do with. It's okay if you feel that way. It's totally okay if you feel that way. So I'm not trying to delegitimize that at all. But I think it's also worth thinking critically about what is the issue that I have with that space, and is there a role that I feel like I could play interacting with it to create a better product at the end of the day? Because they're going to come up with something. Do you want to drive it forward in the best way that you know how, or do you want to leave it to somebody else?
Great. I have two responses, and one of them overlaps very much with yours, namely the the machine learning and AI issues that are out there right now is the hot topic, right? There's so much bias because what's the training set that you're building so that the AI will know what to do? And if you build on top of a faulty or a biased training set, you're not going to get out a unbiased learned set, right? So that's a place, I think, where people who are aware of the potential biases have a lot of contribution and can raise their hand in the organization and say, this is not a complete enough training set. We don't have representation from all the parts of the world that we need in order to be able to be predictive and so on. And you may decide that working for the Department of Defense is not something you want to do, or having them as a client is not something. I can take pride in saying I've never worked for a company that depends on advertising for its revenue. However, I've applied to work there. They just haven't ever given me a job, So how much pride do I have there? I don't know. The other thing that I can talk to you about is from the other side, and that is I was inside, and it was the first time I was working with a financial services organization. There are lots of regulations, just as there are in healthcare, about what kinds of personally identifiable information need to be protected, every time we did a research study, because we were talking to our real clients, I had to record those, and I had to find somebody who was going to save those recordings for me. The person who's in charge of, keeping track of all client interactions had to know we had those recordings and had to set them for protection for 5 years from the date when they were collected. I didn't know if I was going to be at that organization 5 years hence, and so she had to set up for me to make sure my recordings were protected whether I was there or not. So that was an issue, right? And the other thing was I didn't even know I didn't know what PII was, personally identifiable information. So I had to learn that, and then I had to learn which of our clients and what information I had to protect. And then when I goofed, and the director of security, the VP of security said, "You goofed," and that made a lot of work for us, because I sent out stuff to somebody who wasn't supposed to have it, or I let the agency who was doing recruiting for us know too much about our clients rather than just the name and the phone number. And, there were various, I made 2 goofs, and we set up a quarterly meeting, so that I got to review.
Ouch.
No, it was great, because it meant I got to talk to legal, compliance, risk, and security all at once. And they had to agree among them what I could and couldn't do. I was ready to take the steps, but I didn't know where was my fence there. I wanted to get feedback from our real clients, but I had to do it in a protocol that was going to fit with the SEC as well as with the other organizations that we had to report to, right? Yeah. So it works both ways. No, you don't have a comment.
I got nothing on this one. Joys of academia.
Does that help answer a little bit? Okay, good. Speak up.
I think my question is mostly for Dr.
Hmm.
So I'm experimental sociolinguist, and from a developmental psychology background. My degree is mostly in linguistics, and I'm trying to finish up my PhD right now. I'm interested in doing a postdoc possibly somewhere. But the issue that I'm dealing with right now is that for psychology departments, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a linguistic department.
Correct.
Too much of a psychologist. I'm having this identity crisis right now. I don't know how to start my applications. I just briefly put, I'm an experimental linguist, and I let people interpret that. But what are your tips for?
I can speak to this very precisely. So the question is, we have a nice man who's experimental sociolinguist.
Yes.
Experimental sociolinguist, and you're getting a degree in the linguistics department, and you're hoping to move to a psychology arena.
I'm also minoring in developmental psychology.
Oh, excellent. So you're really doing it all. So minor in developmental psychology, and you are considered neither fish nor fowl by everyone you meet. And unfortunately, I already know the conversations you're having where everybody in psychology is saying, but clearly you're not qualified to teach any introductory psychology classes, because how could you be? You do linguistics. And everybody in linguistics is saying, but you're not qualified to do any introductory linguistics stuff, because how could you be? You do all this psychology. It took me 7 years to get through this. That is actually the short, unhappy answer I have for you, which is that I spent 7 years on the job market, essentially. At the beginning, I was someone who was a linguist who was pretending to be a psychologist, and everybody said, but you're really a linguist. By the end, people thought I was a psychologist and were shocked at the level of linguistic sophistication that I could bring to the table. Wow. So that was sort of the high point. And nowadays, actually, most people think I'm a psychologist and not a linguist. The only advice I really have, 2 pieces. One is, you just have to be persistent, and you have to know it's going to take you a long time to be convincing. There is nothing you can do about that. The way academia is set up is that people are horrifically siloed, and everyone says they want you. They all say they want interdisciplinary people who can talk both talks, but they're all lying. They're all used to people in their silos, and so you need to be able to be adept at talking to people only within their silos. So be patient. It's going to take you a while. And then beyond that, is just sell to the people that you are talking to. So if you're talking to psychologists, tell them that you have a degree in psychology and emphasize that you're a psychologist. If you're trying to get a job with linguists, you emphasize your linguistics background. Just, I say, pander to them, because no one will move to you. You have to pander to them to get what you want. And then after some period of time, you will be convincing. You'll pass the test.
And if you're not willing to wait and you can't afford to wait that long, you may want to think about other kinds of jobs that are not so precarious.
Correct.
Well, I try to look at some other job posts, but it's just like, it's so complicated that I'm really in the middle of, I'm so interdisciplinary that people, I guess, don't want to have someone that's, it's just, it gets too complicated because, again, I came from translation and interpretation background, and then I did cognitive science as my master's, and then now I'm
Yeah, I hear you.
developmental stuff, so.
I mean, the thing is,
Repeat what he said.
all right, so the question, the addendum here is basically that this nice man has, actually, it's even worse, because he's got a translation background and a cognitive science background. Like I say, the thing about interdisciplinary work is that people really don't know what to do with it, but it actually does make you better qualified and stronger. So it's
Both inside and outside the academy.
just no, I mean, it's a marathon, not a sprint for this kind of thing. I mean, so you build up your credentials wherever you can. So if you want to stay in the academy, I did 4 years of adjunct teaching, which is, in the academy is like, I mean, it's the salt mines, right? Yeah, absolutely. I did 4 years of that. And I did it in psychology departments. And it actually was one of the things that made me, convincing because I spent time in the psychology salt mines. I did a postdoc with a psychologist to prove my credentials and that kind of thing. But it is also the case, especially if you also decide to go outside the academy, like you say, know that what you have is a strength and don't sell it like you're confused ever, and don't sell it like you think there's any problem with it. It's a strength. Find out what people want, and if you can do that, tell them that's what you can do.
I want to add one thing to that,
Please.
and from my own experience, because I found out that I wanted to be a HCI or a UX person, a human-computer interaction, user experience. And I made that move from New York State, or I guess I was living in Connecticut, to California without a job. I spent several years doing things like project management, executive director of a nonprofit, which was doing much the same work that I had done previously at IBM, but for a nonprofit instead. I did a job, I was thinking of it just a minute ago. Anyway, I had several different jobs which paid money, kept groceries on the table, respectable, and while I was looking for the next UX job that was going to be open because I didn't have enough UX stuff on my background, on my resume, and I didn't have a design degree. And so I was not a designer, I was not a psychologist. What was I, And I kept introducing myself as a linguist. That means I know about cognitive science. Who cares whether I really know enough? But I know a lot about cognitive science, and you all do too. Eventually somebody believed me and gave me a job as a UX manager at Sun Microsystems. Of course, that organization doesn't exist anymore, but I'm connected to all those people who believe and know me as a UX manager. So it was not the precarity thing, but it was the non-identity thing for me, right?
I hear you on that.
Okay. Yes, please.
I have a similar issue to this gentleman. I have a background in criminal justice, and I'm studying linguistics. I focus on
Good for you.
linguistics. And my job is as an English teacher, English lecturer. But what I find is that the world is not comfortable with people who don't fit into one box.
Yes.
And I've had more than one person say to me over the years, you need to figure out what you want to do and then do that one thing. And I thought, no, I don't.
No. Not to have an interesting life, you don't.
No.
I don't, and people don't understand that, and it makes them very uncomfortable. And, I've been looking for other jobs. I have a lot of experience and I'm well qualified to teach English, but that's not really where my heart is.
Right.
And, I think that there's a very small chance that I would be able to find a faculty position in linguistics, but a lot of the faculty jobs in criminal justice want a PhD in criminal justice, but a lot don't. A lot want a master's, a lot of them want a bachelor's in criminal justice, which I have, or an associate's, plus work in the field, which I have. And basically, if you can show up and teach criminal justice and convert oxygen to carbon dioxide, you're happy with your job. But a lot of the, four-year universities want a master's, so I got 18 graduate credit hours in criminal justice. And, I'm trying to think, I sort of cobbled together a master's level degree in CJ, and, I have this linguistics thing, but nobody really knows what forensic linguistics is. And, so even though I'm focusing on interview and interrogation, which I think should be sort of a clue to the criminal justice people, I don't know if that can be very successful.
So I'm going to repeat your comment as I can, but this is someone who has background in criminal justice, both work experience and degree, and who currently works as an English teacher, but is looking for either academic or otherwise positions that are more close to criminal justice. And because she doesn't, she doesn't have the PhD in criminal justice, she's trying to figure out how to be a convincing person in that realm and accepted to be able to have a full-time tenure track position or another satisfying job. Is that fair? Okay. You want to comment?
I think I have nothing to add to this one.
Okay.
I'm actually going to add more, so repeat what I said a little bit, but also for you, which is that you may know in your heart, and you should believe in your heart, that your background makes you stronger at what you do. I 100% agree that a diverse personal background, knowing a lot of different kinds of things is, yes, it's going to make you better at all the things that you're doing. They have the power here, though. They have the jobs. You're going to have to tell them what they want to hear. When I was on the market, I had multiple CVs. I had the CVs for psychology departments. I had the CV for linguistics departments. I had the CV for speech and hearing science departments, and they were different. I mean, there's some basic things about your life you can't change because people want to know, like,
when did you get that degree?
When did you get that degree? You can't change that kind of stuff, but I can change which publications I list. I can change which order I put things in. I can change how I describe my work experience. I can change my research statement to say, to emphasize the things that they want to hear. So, I mean, I used to feel sort of cheap for it all, I'm prostituting myself up for them, making them be who they want me to be. But in the end, I wanted a job more than I wanted to be, accepted for just exactly who I was. Get the job, then be exactly who you want to be, right? But in a way, you have to play the power game. They have the power now, so you have to pander to them.
Seconding Laura's thing about every time I apply for a job, I rewrite the resume. It may be the same bullet points, or I may swap in different bullet points for the same, career chunk. And a resume is shorter than a CV. So, I don't put everything out there on LinkedIn that I want to say in a resume because I want to tailor it to that particular job. So you have a follow-up?
Yes, I wanted to ask your opinion. I do speak, I get invited to address different groups, and they're not really things that would count, for academia, but I do them anyway because I enjoy it, and I can talk to groups like International Association of Chiefs of Police, and Arizona Justice Educators, and so forth, and they seem interested in what I have to say, so even though, the academia is not impressed with that, I think
and the other thing you can do if you like doing that is you can write short articles for those people's journals. And you don't have to put them on your CV as publications, but you can certainly include them in your long resume or, some version of your publications, popular journals or other publications. And that will get you attention in the right way, the positive attention that you want. Blog posts, interviews, popular journals, those are all fine. Good, perfect, excellent.
So I will actually
Go for it.
So I'll just add one thing sort of to follow up on this from the industry side, and this also follows up on what Laura concluded with. This idea of, get in the door, say the things that they want to hear, and then figure out who you want to be. In industry, that can often manifest itself as carving out a place for yourself within the organization. And depending on the size of the company you're working for and the flexibility, Carving out a role for yourself can mean things like creating a new role that didn't exist before within the company because you got in the door with the things that they wanted to hear. And then you showed them all of these other skills that you had. And eventually you can take that, you take that up the chain and you say, hey, I've been doing all of the things I was hired for. I've also been doing all of these other things for which I am qualified. And I think that a new role, or I think that this different role within the organization would be a better fit for me. So part of it is figuring out who you want to be. And the other side of it is advocating for yourself within the structure of the organization that you're in and finding out where the best place is to be that person that you want to be.
I'm just going to add something that both Emily and I were just before this session, we were at the Career Mixer, which is like 10-minute dating for people who are career curious. And so but one of the things I said there to people, and that several of them had heard that elsewhere, but I'll say it in case people haven't heard it here. When you look at a job posting, not necessarily in academia, but outside, and you see all these things that they want you to have, if you have 30 or 40% of it, go ahead and apply for the job. It doesn't matter. It's okay and emphasize those things that you have that respond to the words in the ad. When you actually get past the HR person who does screening and you talk to the hiring manager, you'll find out that what they really want, or what the things are that are important for them about those 15 things that they had in there. And you'll find out that they actually want those 7 things that you have that you didn't know they wanted. So you are going to be, even with part of the requirements, you're going to be better off. Plus you will have a master's or a PhD. And oh my God, that must mean so much. She knows so many things I didn't even think of she knew, Yes, please.
So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about collaboration. So I've ended up in a PhD program where there is not really collaboration.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, how do I avoid ending up in a place like that again? What things do I not even know that I don't know because I haven't been collaborating?
All right, I'll go first on this.
I'm ready.
I'll start on this one. So I'm sorry. Because collaboration for me at least is, so the question was about, this is a person who's in a department that doesn't have much collaboration and she wants to know what's she missing by not having any and how does she avoid being in a place like that. Like I said, collaboration for me is the thing I love most about what I do. So yes, I feel your pain. I think the question about how do you, what are you missing? I mean, you're missing the power that you get from collaboration, right? The fact that if you're working with other smart people, you don't always have to be the smartest person in the room all the time. They can be smart too. And then you actually get to be collectively way smarter. And so, I mean, it's really fun to work with people who are as good as you or even better than you. And then to sort of, you push each other and you develop new things. So that is what you're missing. In terms of how do you get to a place where you can have that, this I think goes back to something that Nancy said. That's a fit question. So if you are interviewing and you feel like, if you're ever interviewing for a job anywhere and you feel like these are not people you could talk to, odds are good you can't collaborate with them. And in job interviews, often people, one of the conversations that we often have are about what would be potential collaborative overlaps with us. And if people aren't talking to you about potential collaborative overlaps, that's a bad sign. But you want to go to a place where you fit with the people. And if you think you're a collaborative person, feel that out when you're interviewing anywhere. Industry or academia.
Go ahead.
So this is a topic that I'm in the middle of, beginning of writing a book about with a collaborator. And we have an article that is out actually probably today. But what the angle on it that we're taking is that the user experience team is likely a great collaborative partner for each of the other departments in your organization. So we're great working with customer support because we want to see those logs and help you figure out how your log taxonomy of customer calls could be adjusted so that it actually identifies problems in a way that the engineers and the UX people can solve them. Because if you just say customer error, that's not helpful. I don't believe in customer errors. Customer errors happen because we didn't do a good job of designing the product. So if I can collaborate with the user support and the customer support people, we can make their taxonomy match things we can actually do something about. If I collaborate with engineering, here's the example that's in the article. The head of design and the head of engineering went on a customer call, or maybe it was just the head of engineering, came back and realized there was a gap in the product line. It took them about 4 years before the two of them together managed to convince the higher-ups, the executive team, that we have an opportunity here to fill a gap. Nobody is doing this stuff. We just heard from our customers, and we've checked it with some other ones. Here's a prototype of what we'd like to do. So you do a little bit of the work and dangle it in front of somebody and find an executive champion who says, oh my God, that's really great. Let's make that happen. And they are now the leaders and effectively the only ones doing that bit, and it's pushed that company way up for that collaboration. You know, the result of the collaboration is the company wins. So there are, you know, if I agree completely with Laura's assessment. You can ask questions about collaboration when you're about to interview. You can say, how do you work with the other parts of the organization? Who takes the lead? You know, is this something that has to be authorized by management, or can each of us go and seek out the collaborative partners that we believe will make us more effective in getting the job done, which is not my job, but the job of moving the company forward, the product forward.
So my first thought here would be that it's important to answer for yourself what you mean and what you want when you say collaboration. Because there's different forms that can take within an organization. When you talk about collaboration, do you mean that you want to be in a room with all of your teammates all day long, working collaboratively on a problem together, and that's all of your work life? Or do you mean that you're part of a team where you're going to sometimes, or a fair bit of the time, do your own part of the puzzle and then come back together and make the big picture? Because I think it's important to define that for yourself, and then it's important to define that when you're asking these great questions about what collaboration looks like. Ask those questions so that you'll get the answers for what you mean when you say collaboration, and not the answer that the person you're talking to thinks that you mean, or what they mean when they say collaboration. The other part of this would be, and this maybe applies more once you get into an organization, maybe it's not as collaborative as you want it to be. That doesn't mean that you can't help change it. You know, we've talked a little bit about power dynamics here, so I'm not saying that you could like walk into the room as a new employee and totally change the structure. But you can ask questions and try to figure out like, I thought we'd be collaborating more and we're not. Why are we not collaborating more? Is there friction between the team? Are we just bad at communicating? Did it turn out that actually this project was just less collaborative than we thought, or people feel too busy to collaborate? Some of these are going to be structural issues with the organization, or the manager's an asshole.
And everybody else in the organization knows it too.
Yeah, some of these are going to be structural issues that you maybe can't change, but you may also encounter teams or organizations where people just say, we never thought about collaborating on this thing. And maybe they would like to listen to you about why you should collaborate on it. And the last thing that I would say there is, say on the collaboration topic, is that you are almost guaranteed to pick something that is a bad fit at some point. So I know you said you want to avoid that. You are not likely to be able to avoid it forever. Just because you can go into a company, you can go into an interview, you can ask all of the possible questions that you can think of. You can get the answers that you want where they actually meant the same thing that you were asking, and then you show up to the organization and there's a new manager or something, the mission changed or something, or it just turns out that the thing that they said they wanted wasn't the thing that they wanted. And they might not know that until you get in the room and start doing the thing that they told you they wanted. And that's okay. Again, we've talked a lot about like figuring out your place and figuring out what your limits are. So I just want to add that comment that for anything, it's not just collaboration. You can try as much as possible to get all of the information going through the interview process. You can get somewhere and find that it is still a bad fit for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with you or the questions that you asked. And, you know, if that happens, then you just say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a mulligan on this one and just find a new job. And that's fine.
You reminded me. Okay. Let me tell you a story. In 1996, I got laid off. And I had my daughter remembers this as the best summer of her life because I could drive her and her friend around to swim lessons and all kinds of fun things. But by the end of the summer, I had 2 job offers. And I had to make a decision. One of them was for a private company, and the other one was for this nonprofit that I ended up taking, the executive director position. But the first one was like the most intriguing job ever. It was and it was very collaborative. It was going to be a partnership between the real estate division, the IT department, and management training, and trying to figure out for this organization how much office space did they actually need. And this is like early stages of commercial internet. How could they, because every day in a large organization, somebody's on vacation, somebody's sick, and somebody's traveling. So why do we have an office and a desk for everybody like that when all their work is digital? And so any machine would be fine. Why don't you sit at this desk today? Why don't you sit at this desk tomorrow? It doesn't matter, just find a desk. But we don't have to have, if we have 15,000 employees, we don't have to have 15,000 desks. How are we going to make this work? I loved talking to the guy who was going to hire me. I thought this was great. Now, they had another thing that was new. So who was going to be my manager? It was going to be matrix management from all 3 of those groups. But this was an organization that didn't have experience with matrix management. Okay, that's a little danger sign. Interesting. Then the other thing was, this was not a UX job, right? Except it was in the biggest construal. It's definitely a UX job. It's the user is the employee. Are they going to be satisfied with their head screwing around? What room am I in? What office is this? Is there anybody nearby that I know? You know, and we know all that stuff about the proximity, physical proximity makes the collaboration work better, more easily. Anyway, ultimately I didn't take the job because of some of those flags. But the one that you mentioned is exactly the one that happened. As he was talking to me about the offer, he said, I'm not going to be your manager, but I am going to be your first client because I've just accepted a new job. I said, who's going to be my manager? Well, we have an offer out to somebody, but I can't tell you because they haven't accepted it yet. I said, great. So I went off for a long weekend, soaking in the hot tub and saying, what should I be doing? And with a friend of mine who is going to be my advisor on this, and we made lists of pros and cons. And I finally decided I couldn't live with that. There was too much uncertainty. And the advice I had gotten early in my corporate career is, when you take a job, obviously some doors are going to close and others will open. What's the next job after that for you? And I could not figure out, because the competency I was going to develop for this company in figuring out how to teach managers how to manage remote people, how to figure out what the real estate requirements were, all those things. That was such an oddball new thing. The only thing I could think of doing next was go out and be a consultant and help other organizations do that. Or go work for Steelcase to help them manage the kind of furniture they were going to put in those kinds of offices or something. I couldn't figure out, I didn't have a good enough imagination to think about what could I do next after that? How could I get myself back into UX in a more traditional sense? So I chose not to do that. Now, it would have made a completely different career, and it probably would have been fine. But I made that decision that it was too much uncertainty for me, even me, who can live with a lot of ambiguity and a lot of uncertainty.
We have just enough time for one short question, if anyone has another one.
Behind you, next to you here.
Sorry. There you go. I had to say it anyway.
So about your comments about like tailoring yourself to the job, I've gotten the impression that the way I would need to prepare myself to tailor myself to an academic job is very different from an industry job. And if I want to really prepare myself for either option, because they're both options, how do I manage to do that without half-assing both of them?
There's so many things to say. Okay, so the question is, I'm interested in both academia or potentially a career in industry, and how do I prepare myself for each of those options without half-assing it?
Can
Yes,
I
please,
just
go
want
for
to add one comment to start off with, because we all clearly have a lot of thoughts on this, which is, and I'm not speaking to the academia side, I'm only speaking to the industry side. Industry is not a monolith, so it's not necessarily just preparing yourself for academia or industry. There is also a lot of division within industry, which doesn't mean, of course,
academia.
yeah, and within academia. Okay, perfect. So I have a vote for within academia as well. So there's clearly a division between the two, and we can dive into that some. But you also just be prepared that you may have to tailor yourself to more than one sector within industry as well, and start thinking about that before you realize it later.
Yeah. I mean, the only advice I would give is very similar to the other advice. You have to be who you are. So learn all sorts of stuff and be super awesome at whatever it is that you're doing, and learn a lot of different kinds of things. The tailoring is about the presentation you put forward. So surely your computational skills, if you're going to a linguistics department, are all about how you'd be great at teaching linguistics. If it's in a psychology department, it's all about how you have this amazing modeling skill for understanding the human mind. If you're going to a computer science department, it's about how you can teach that. If you're going into industry, I don't know how you're going to sell it, but I bet in different parts of industry, you're just going to sell that same skill. You're just going to call it something different, and emphasis, and the little description under the bullet point changes. But I don't think the skill changes.
I also, just to build on that and add one thing that's not totally negative to scare you into having to tailor yourself for everything, which is that a lot of people half-ass things all the time.
Also true.
I was working at a company whose name you would easily know. It's a household name. And I was upset with, and I knew I was the only one who was upset with the typos in the news release, the product release that was coming out that week. And I said, this is not up to the quality that we've put into this product. Why are we letting this piece of, marketing material or whatever it was out when it's got so many errors? And I said this to somebody, my manager or some colleague, and they said, you should go talk to Ralph, or whatever his name was. And I went and talked to him. And he said, anything worth doing is worth doing half-assed. And I thought, whoa, I think we've just had a values conflict. Now, I will say there are times when I have understood what he meant and that I can justify it. Namely, getting the thing off your desk and out in the world is better than holding on to it.
Yes.
And so that's the sense in which I can positively accept what he said. And we'll fix it in the next rev. That's another famous thing. We'll fix it in the next rev. You're going to let stuff out, but you are always, because nothing is finished, everything's digital, you can change everything, and you can fix it in the next rev. And there's always this ranking about all the things we could fix in the next rev. How many can we get out in a good time, in the amount of time we're giving ourselves? So that's the positive side of half-assedness, okay? But in general, I like things to be right, and at the quality level that I care about.
Okay, I'll give one more thing, because as someone who actually works in two different disciplines, I actually, when I was going through my imposter syndrome stage, the imposter syndrome stage was all about how I was neither a very good linguist nor was I a very good psychologist, because clearly how could I be both of those things? But I was actually doing both those things. And I was worried that at some point that, I knew that all the linguists were looking at me going, she's shitty at linguistics. I knew all the psychologists were looking at me going, she may be great at linguistics, but she's shitty at psychology. But that last part has actually turned out to be the really important part. Was the part where all the psychologists assumed I was really good at linguistics, and all the linguistics assumed I was really good at psychology. So weirdly enough, even though I was always worried I was half-assing it all, people on either side just assumed that the piece about me that they didn't understand as well, I must be brilliant at. So you can actually take your half-assedness, like I say, so accept your imposter syndrome and then let it go. But then also, like I say, be aware that if you are multidisciplinary like that, very few people are going to have the same exact set of skill set that you do. So you can, so weirdly enough, there's this weird rug that you own rugs to hide shit under. And people can't tell. So it's a great way to embrace that part of it for you.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I thank our speakers again.
You are, you guys are phenomenal. Really fun. She's good.